On a chilly Friday evening in late October 2023, the last traces of sunlight had just faded, leaving the small suburban town of Woodbury, New York. Cloaked in the early darkness of 7:45 p.m., Clara Evans sat alone in the family's dimly lit living room, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock that had once belonged to her late mother. The house, though modern and spacious, felt unusually quiet, as though it was holding its breath in anticipation. Clara had always been close to her father, Henry Evans, a man of few words and steady habits. Since her mother's passing 5 years ago, their lives had fallen into a predictable routine, one that Clara found both comforting and suffocating. That routine was shattered on September 15, 2023, when Henry returned from a business trip with news that took Clara by surprise. He had met someone. Her name was Laura Martin, a recently widowed woman from Boston with a son, Ethan, who was around Clara's age. Just 2 months later, Laura and Ethan moved into the Evans home, transforming the once quiet house into something new, something unfamiliar. Clara remembered the first time she saw Ethan. It was 10:15 a.m. on a brisk Saturday morning, October 1st, 2023, when they arrived. Ethan, tall and lean, with dark hair that fell just above his eyes, had an air of effortless charm. He offered Clara a polite smile as he carried a large suitcase into the house, his posture relaxed, his movements fluid. He seemed at ease, as if he had always belonged there, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His presence unsettled her, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps it was the way he seemed too polished, too perfect, like someone playing a role in a carefully crafted performance. As the days passed, Ethan integrated himself seamlessly into the family's daily life. He quickly gained Henry's trust and affection, helping him with tasks around the house and engaging in long conversations about business, sports, and the news. Clara often found herself on the outside, watching as her father grew closer to this stranger who now shared their home. There was something in Ethan's eyes that Clara didn't trust, a flicker of calculation, a hint of something darker beneath the surface. One evening, as Clara was preparing for bed, she overheard a conversation between Henry and Laura. It was 10:30 p.m., October 14th, 2023. The hushed tones and the mention of starting fresh and letting go of the past made Clara's skin prickle with unease. Laura's voice was soothing, almost too soothing, as she assured Henry that everything would be fine now that they were together. Clara couldn't help but wonder what past they were trying to escape, and why Laura seemed so determined to bury it. In the following weeks, Clara tried to befriend Ethan, but he remained distant, always polite but never fully open. He would tell her stories about his life in Boston, about his school, his friends, and his father's tragic death in a car accident 2 years prior. But there were inconsistencies in his stories, small details that didn't quite add up. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Ethan mentioned a close friend named Alex, who had helped him through tough times. But just days later, when Henry asked about Alex during dinner, Ethan seemed to struggle to remember who he was. Clara's suspicion deepened, but she kept her thoughts to herself, not wanting to cause unnecessary tension. By mid-November, Clara's curiosity had turned into something darker, an obsession. She began to watch Ethan more closely, noting his routines, his habits. On the evening of November 19th, 2023, Clara was cleaning the guest room where Ethan had been staying when she stumbled upon an old, leather-bound photo album wedged between 2 books on a shelf. The album was worn, its pages yellowed with age. Inside were photos of Ethan, or rather, someone who looked like Ethan, but the name scrawled beneath the images was different: David. The photos were taken in places Ethan had never mentioned: New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and one in front of a small house that was unmistakably dated by the 2006 calendar in the background. There were no pictures of Laura, nor any of the friends or places Ethan had described to her in his stories. Clara's heart raced as she flipped through the album, the unease she had felt since Ethan's arrival now sharpened into fear. Who was this person living in her home? And why had he lied about his identity? The realization hit her with the force of a blow. Ethan or David was hiding something significant, something dangerous. As she placed the album back on the shelf, careful to leave everything as it was, a chill ran down her spine. The quiet house suddenly felt oppressive, as though the walls were closing in on her. Clara knew she had to find out the truth, but she also knew that uncovering it could unravel everything her father had built with Laura. The clock struck 9 p.m., marking the end of another day in what had once been a normal life. But Clara knew that nothing was normal anymore. The secrets hidden within the walls of her home were growing darker by the day, and she was about to step into the shadows. Clara's mind was restless as she lay awake in her bed on the night of November 20th, 2023. The discovery of the photo album haunted her, the images of Ethan, no, David, flashing through her thoughts. She tried to dismiss the gnawing suspicion, telling herself that there could be a simple explanation, but her instincts wouldn't let it go. At 2:30 a.m., unable to sleep, she slipped out of bed, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and made her way to the guest room. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old walls. Clara stood in the dark hallway, staring at the door to Ethan's room, a sense of dread settling in her stomach. She needed answers, but she wasn't sure she was ready for what she might find. Still, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. After a moment, she turned away and headed downstairs instead. The living room was dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows across the furniture. Clara settled onto the couch, pulling a blanket around her shoulders, and tried to make sense of the situation. The next morning, she awoke to the sound of the front door closing. It was 7:15 a.m., and she realized she had fallen asleep on the couch. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she noticed that Ethan was already gone. Her father, Henry, was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper. He mentioned that Ethan had left early for a morning run, something he had recently taken up since moving in. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was deliberately avoiding her. His early departure only fueled her suspicions, and she decided it was time to dig deeper into his past. After breakfast, she waited until her father and Laura had left for work, then went back to Ethan's room. She searched carefully, not wanting to disturb anything, and eventually found a small locked box hidden under his bed. It was old, with tarnished brass corners, and had an air of something long forgotten. Later that day, Clara took the box to the local locksmith, a small, cluttered shop on Main Street. It was 3:45 p.m. when the locksmith managed to unlock it. Inside, she found a collection of documents, birth certificates, school records, and newspaper clippings. The birth certificate listed David Alexander Green as the name, born June 14, 1998. Clara's hands trembled as she realized the truth. Ethan wasn't his real name. The newspaper clippings were even more disturbing. One article, dated September 10, 2018, detailed the mysterious disappearance of a young man named David Green from a small town in New Jersey. He had vanished without a trace after a late-night party, leaving his family and friends baffled. Another clipping from October 5, 2018, mentioned a tragic car accident that occurred shortly after David's disappearance. The driver, who was identified only as a close friend, had died in the crash, but there was no mention of David being involved. The pieces didn't add up, but one thing was clear: Ethan had gone to great lengths to bury his past. Clara knew she needed to be careful. Confronting Ethan directly could be dangerous, especially now that she had uncovered his lies. But she couldn't keep this to herself either. She had to find out what really happened to David Green, and why Ethan had taken his place. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day, as Clara tried to act normal around Ethan, who seemed completely oblivious to her discovery. On November 23, 2023, Clara decided to reach out to the local library to do some research. It was 1 p.m. when she sat down at a computer, combing through online archives and public records. She searched for any information on David Green, his family, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. The more she uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. David Green had been a troubled young man, involved in several minor criminal activities as a teenager: vandalism, petty theft, and a few incidents of aggression. His family had moved frequently, trying to escape his reputation, but it seemed trouble followed wherever he went. Clara found an old arrest record from 2015, when David was just 17. It was for an assault that had left another boy in the hospital with a fractured skull. The charges had been dropped, but the incident had left a lasting stain on David's life. By the time of his disappearance in 2018, he had been in and out of juvenile detention centers and had few friends left. Clara's heart pounded as she realized the implications. If Ethan was really David, then he had a dark past that he was desperately trying to escape. But the question remained: why had he taken on a new identity, and what was he running from? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture was far from complete. Clara knew she needed to find someone who could help her make sense of it all, someone who might have known David Green before he became Ethan. On the evening of November 24, 2023, at 8 p.m., Clara decided to take the next step. She contacted a private investigator who had once helped a family friend. The man, a grizzled veteran named Jack Roberts, agreed to meet her the next day. Clara felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks, but it was overshadowed by the fear of what she might uncover. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was growing closer, that Ethan was more than just a man with a secret. He was a ticking time bomb, and the clock was running out. Clara felt the cold December air bite at her skin as she stepped out of her car on the afternoon of December 1st, 2023. It was 4:15 p.m., and the sun was already sinking low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the nearly deserted parking lot of the diner where she was meeting Jack Roberts. The private investigator had agreed to meet her in this out-of-the-way location, away from the prying eyes of Woodbury's small-town gossip mill. As she entered the diner, the smell of stale coffee and frying bacon greeted her. Jack was already seated in a booth at the back, his weathered face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. Clara slid into the booth across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. She handed over the documents she had found, along with the photo album, and watched as Jack's expression shifted from mild interest to deep concern. The minutes ticked by in tense silence as he examined the evidence. At 5 p.m., he finally looked up and told Clara what she had feared most. There was no doubt that Ethan was, in fact, David Green, a man with a violent past and a missing persons report still active in New Jersey. Jack's voice was steady, but Clara could sense the urgency beneath his calm demeanor. He promised to dig deeper and get back to her within a week, but he warned her to stay cautious. The next few days were agonizingly slow for Clara. She was hyper-aware of Ethan's every move, noticing how he seemed to always be one step ahead, as if he knew she was onto him. On December 4th, 2023, at 10:45 p.m., she awoke to the sound of footsteps outside her bedroom door. The house was dark, the only light coming from the hallway. Holding her breath, Clara listened as the footsteps paused, then retreated down the stairs. She waited until she was sure the coast was clear before slipping out of bed and quietly following. She found Ethan standing in the kitchen, staring out the window into the night. There was something unsettling about the way he stood there, so still, like a predator watching its prey. Clara retreated to her room, her heart racing. She knew she had to act quickly. The following day, at 3:30 p.m., she received a call from Jack. He had uncovered more about David Green, details that made Clara's blood run cold. David's so-called friend, who had died in the car accident, was actually the last person seen with David on the night he disappeared. The police had suspected foul play, but had never found enough evidence to pursue charges. It seemed that David had faked his death and taken on a new identity, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. With this new information, Clara felt a mix of fear and resolve. She couldn't keep this to herself any longer. On the morning of December 6, 2023, at 9 a.m., she decided to confront her father. Henry was in his study, the morning light filtering through the curtains as he worked at his desk. Clara felt a pang of guilt as she realized how much this revelation would hurt him, but she knew there was no other choice. She presented the evidence to him, laying out everything she had discovered. Henry's reaction was one of disbelief at first, but as Clara explained the inconsistencies in Ethan's stories, the false identity, and the violent past he had been hiding, she saw the color drain from her father's face. Henry was devastated, but he agreed to help Clara gather more proof before they went to the authorities. That afternoon, they searched through Ethan's belongings more thoroughly, finding more disturbing evidence: fake IDs, a burner phone, and a knife hidden in a duffel bag. It was becoming clear that Ethan, or David, was not just running from his past. He was preparing for something, and Clara feared what that might be. The tension in the house was unbearable. Clara and Henry tried to act normal, but every interaction with Ethan felt like a dangerous game of cat and mouse. On the evening of December 8, 2023, at 7:30 p.m., Clara noticed Ethan was unusually quiet during dinner, his eyes flicking between her and Henry, as if he could sense the change in their behavior. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the clatter of cutlery against plates. Clara's mind raced with the possibilities of what Ethan might do if he discovered their plans. By December 9, 2023, at 2 p.m., Jack Roberts had gathered enough evidence to take to the police. Clara and Henry agreed to meet him at the police station later that afternoon, but before they could leave, something unexpected happened. Laura, who had been away visiting a friend, returned home early. She walked into the house at 3:45 p.m., catching Clara and Henry off guard as they were preparing to leave. Laura immediately sensed the tension and demanded to know what was going on. Before Clara or Henry could explain, Ethan appeared in the doorway. He had heard everything. The mask of calm and charm he had worn so well cracked, revealing the cold, calculating side that Clara had only glimpsed before. In a low, measured tone, he accused them of betrayal, his eyes burning with anger. The air in the room grew thick with fear as Ethan slowly advanced toward them, his hand slipping into his pocket where Clara knew he kept the knife. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she realized how quickly the situation had escalated. What had started as a quiet investigation had turned into a life-threatening confrontation. She could see the fury in Ethan's eyes, the way his hand gripped the handle of the knife, and she knew they were in immediate danger. The clock was ticking, and there was no more time for hesitation. As Ethan took another step forward, Clara steeled herself for what was to come, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether they made it out alive. The knife glinted in the dim light of the living room as Ethan slowly advanced, his eyes locked onto Clara and Henry with a chilling intensity. It was 3:50 p.m. on December 9th, 2023, and the once warm and familiar home had transformed into a scene of palpable dread. Clara's heart raced as she realized how quickly their situation had spiraled out of control. She could feel the weight of Ethan's gaze, predatory and cold, as if he were calculating his next move with lethal precision. Laura stood frozen near the door, her confusion giving way to terror as she noticed the knife in Ethan's hand. The air was thick with the unspoken realization that this was no longer a simple family dispute. It was a life-or-death moment. Clara's mind raced, searching for a way out, but the panic clawing at her thoughts made it difficult to think clearly. Ethan's every movement was deliberate, his steps measured, as though he were savoring the fear that had overtaken the room. At 3:52 p.m., Ethan stopped just a few feet from Clara and Henry, his voice low and dangerous as he accused them of betraying him, of trying to ruin the life he had so carefully constructed. His words were sharp, cutting through the silence like the blade in his hand. Clara could see the flash of desperation in his eyes, a reflection of the fragile control he was on the verge of losing. She knew that any sudden move could push him over the edge, and the consequences would be fatal. Clara's gaze darted to her father, who was standing just to her left, his face pale and tense. She could see the fear etched into his features, the helplessness in his eyes as he realized the danger they were in. Henry's hands trembled slightly, but he held his ground, refusing to back down even as Ethan's anger grew more intense. The silence between them was suffocating, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, a reminder of the precious seconds slipping away. In a desperate attempt to de-escalate the situation, Clara subtly shifted her weight, her eyes searching for anything she could use to protect herself and her family. She knew they couldn't wait for the police to arrive. Time was running out. At 3:55 p.m., she saw her chance. Just behind Ethan, near the edge of the kitchen counter, was a heavy ceramic vase that had been one of her mother's favorite decorations. It was within arm's reach, but getting to it without provoking Ethan was a gamble. Clara's breath hitched as she made her decision. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, she lunged toward the vase, her fingers closing around its cool, smooth surface. Ethan reacted instantly, turning toward her with the knife raised, but Clara was faster. She swung the vase with all her strength, the heavy object connecting with Ethan's arm just as he moved to strike. The impact was enough to knock the knife from his hand, sending it clattering to the floor. Henry seized the opportunity, grabbing Ethan by the shoulders and wrestling him to the ground. The struggle was chaotic, a blur of desperate movements and muffled grunts as Henry fought to keep Ethan subdued. Clara, her hands trembling, kicked the knife away from the scuffle, her heart pounding as the reality of what was happening sank in. Laura, finally snapping out of her shock, rushed to help, using her body to pin Ethan's legs down. By 3:57 p.m., the fight had drained the room of its breath, leaving only the sounds of labored breathing and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Ethan lay pinned beneath Henry and Laura, his face twisted in fury and defeat. The man who had once seemed so charming, so controlled, was now exposed, his true nature laid bare for all to see. Clara stood over them, her chest heaving as she tried to steady herself. The danger had passed, but the emotional toll was just beginning to settle in. At 4 p.m., the police burst through the front door, guns drawn, ready for the worst. They quickly assessed the situation, pulling Ethan up from the floor and placing him in handcuffs. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of relief and professionalism as they secured the scene. Clara watched in stunned silence as they led Ethan out of the house, his eyes locking with hers one last time, a silent promise that this wasn't over, that he would find a way to finish what he had started. As the front door closed behind the officers, the house fell into a heavy silence, the only sound the fading echo of sirens in the distance. Clara felt the weight of everything that had happened press down on her, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted. She knew that while the immediate threat had been neutralized, the scars of this confrontation would linger long after the police had gone. The clock on the wall ticked forward, marking the passage of time, but for Clara, it felt as though everything had come to a standstill. The truth had been exposed, but the cost of that revelation would be something she and her family would carry with them forever. As the darkness of evening began to settle outside, Clara realized that the hardest part was yet to come, the reckoning with everything they had uncovered, and the uncertainty of what the future would hold. The morning after the confrontation, December 10th, 2023, the house was eerily quiet. It was 8:15 a.m., and the early winter sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting long, pale shadows across the living room where the chaos had unfolded just hours before. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The events of the previous day replayed in her mind, each moment etched with vivid clarity: the knife, the struggle, the fear that had gripped them all. Henry joined her at 8:30 a.m., his face lined with exhaustion. The weight of what had happened hung heavily between them, an unspoken understanding that their lives had been irrevocably changed. The police had taken Ethan into custody, and Clara had spent the early hours of the morning giving her statement. The detectives confirmed that Ethan, or rather David Green, was wanted in connection with multiple crimes across state lines, including the suspicious death of his former friend. The realization that they had harbored a fugitive in their home was a bitter pill to swallow. At 9 a.m., Laura finally emerged from her room, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She moved as if in a daze, still grappling with the truth about the son she thought she knew. The shock had shattered her, leaving her adrift in a sea of disbelief and sorrow. Clara watched her stepmother with a mixture of sympathy and detachment, knowing that the bonds of their family had been strained to the breaking point. Over the next few days, the house remained tense and silent, the only sound the occasional ring of the phone as law enforcement followed up on the case. Clara struggled with the aftermath of what had happened, how close they had come to disaster, and how the truth had nearly destroyed them. It was clear that their family would never be the same. The shadows of Ethan's, or David's, deception lingered in every room, a reminder of the darkness that had infiltrated their lives. On December 15th, 2023, Clara stood at the edge of the driveway at 7:45 p.m., watching as the last remnants of daylight faded from the sky. The house behind her was still, its windows dark, but the weight of the past weeks felt lighter somehow. The immediate danger had passed, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. Clara knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that trust would have to be rebuilt, and that the wounds left by Ethan's lies would not easily fade. As she turned to go back inside, Clara realized that while the nightmare was over, the echoes of it would remain with them forever. But in the stillness of that cold December night, she also understood that they had survived, that the truth, however painful, had set them free.